Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me today from the great state of Texas is my friend and colleague Neil Chateltain. Neil, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Chris. How are you doing?
I've been better. I had an ironclad ambush that hit me in the forehead. Let me see which side here. So everyone, if you're watching this, listeners aren't going to notice, but if you're watching, you're going to see this big band-aid on the center of my forehead, which I thought looked better than the big open wound that was otherwise there. So, and then my glasses are actually hiding one. I don't know if you can see it there. So,
Mhm.
um, I hit myself in the face with a picket fence post.
As we've all done before. I've had something similar happen before, so
That's what I get for that do-it-yourself spirit, right? Like, yeah, sure, I can fix a fence. Yeah, how hard can it be? Smack. So, in any event, Ironclad Ambush is our theme for today because you have a new book coming out by that title. It is about the battle at the head of passes, which might be something folks have never even heard of, but it is a really important first step in opening the Mississippi River.
yeah.
So tell us what are the head of passes?
Yeah, so if you've not heard of the head of passes, then you're not somebody who lives in South Louisiana, probably. It's the mouth of the Mississippi River. The problem is the mouth of the Mississippi River isn't just an outlet of a river like any other plain old river. So today we call it the Birdfoot Delta, essentially. So you just take a hand like you're doing a high five, flip it upside down, and all the fingers of the different exits to the Mississippi River, they all converge in your palm, and that palm is the head of passes where all the passes merge together into one spot.
Um,
Um, this is a big deal for uh, trade because that means there are several entrances and exits to the Mississippi River. So smaller ships can go through a narrower pass or a shallower pass. Bigger ships can go through the better kept ones, the ones with a deeper space. So that's good for trade. For the Civil War, it's a huge problem for the U.S. Navy, though, because you can't just send one blockading ship to blockade the mouth of the Mississippi River because there's like five exits to the river all of a sudden. And they're not within mutually supporting distance of one another. They're 10, 20 miles apart from each other as they spread out and fan out. So that means that the Mississippi River, to blockade it effectively, you gotta have like a half dozen ships there instead of one or two. And that becomes a problem for the US Navy. And so the premise of the book and everything is that the US Navy is going to occupy the head of passes, that central point where all these passes converge, and the Confederates are going to fight back to kick them out. And mysteriously, it involves an ambush from an ironclad in their attempt.
Dun dun dun
Right?
dun. Yeah. So now, and I've never been that far down the Mississippi. I have been south of New Orleans, but there's, what, 100 miles of river still to go past
Yeah.
New Orleans, right? Uh, but my guess is if we kind of use your hand metaphor, which I thought was really good, this the land area between the fingers is like swampy, bayou-y, channels and a lot of swampland, right?
There's practically no land area between all these different fingers. The land is literally just the banks of the river or the banks of each separate pass. And literally, if you're on a ship in one of these entrance passes, the Southwest Pass is the one everybody uses today. That's the one that cruise ships and oil tankers and whatnot go through, and that's the one where some of this battle takes place. Um, if you're on the ship and you look over the side one way or the other, you can see the river, you can see the banks of Southwest Pass, and then on the other side is the Gulf of Mexico, like literally like 100 yards, you
Yeah.
know. And so there's practically no land. It's all the water converging, and it's really cool because you can see the Mississippi River freshwater converge with the Gulf saltwater, and it creates like this muddy goop as everything collides. And depending on how much rain there is, or where the currents are, or how things are going, sometimes that location changes. So it's pretty weird stuff to see in person. I've had the chance to see that a couple of times in person, which is pretty nice. But like, there's not much land there at all, and it's very much a constrained water space. Today it's full of oil platforms and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but like the geography is really crazy to look at, and that's got huge impacts on trade today, but it's got huge impacts on the blockade back then.
So I, because I'm thinking like probably a lot of places where blockade runners could hide. You talk about, smaller boats and ships as well as larger ones. So like just hard to pin down the opposition, regardless of which side you're on. And then maybe not a lot of places where like, you know what, we're going to put a big fort here at the mouth of the river and, like, yeah,
And
how
that's
do you
part of
do
it.
that?
And that's part of it. The U.S. military wanted to put a fort in that head of passes, and that's one of the reasons the Navy went there to occupy it was have the Navy there. They guard the place while a fort gets built, like a land battery, not a real fort, but just a battery of some sort. And then the battery can cover the ships in case the Confederates launch a strike. Well, when they did an initial survey, the Army Corps of Engineers did, and they were like, we found a spot for this fort, and they ordered cannons, and they started finding equipment, and they started getting sand and everything. And then the chief engineer in charge of the project did a second survey and said, yeah, it's not going to work. There's no ground here. Like, and so one of the reasons the Confederates launched this ambush is stop the prevention of the building of this fort. And the U.S. military decided to abandon the building of the fort before the attack was launched, but nobody knew it at the time.
Yeah.
So it's one of the case of like communication by water takes a long time, and so everybody's kind of misinformed as to things. But the idea of a fort being there is tough. That's why Forts Jackson and St. Philip were like
Right.
25 miles up the river because it takes that long to get solid ground that's good enough for a fort with 100 cannons in it.
Yeah. So let's say I'm Winfield Scott and I'm proposing the Anaconda Plan, and we're going to try to blockade the coast, and we're going to go up the Mississippi River. And sitting at a desk in Washington sounds like a great idea. At what point does somebody realize that this is probably going to be tougher than people realize to just go up the Mississippi River? There are logistical issues to blockading the mouth of it.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing. So first off, the folks in Washington know this. When they convened this thing called the Blockade Board, that they had naval officers in mid 1861 write a report that surveyed all the Confederacy's coastline and like, here's where we need a blockade. This is the inlet for each area. It's basically they essentially created the equivalent of like the Coast Guard's issues of the coast pilots, the coastal information booklets that exist for each harbor today. Um, those naval officers write up these reports. Report number one is mouth of Mississippi River,
Yeah.
which kind of gives you a little hint there. Um, and they come up with all these reasons of why it's important to blockade the river and how difficult it will be, and but why it matters so much. Part of that's the Anaconda Plan. Part of that is New Orleans is the biggest city, the biggest port, all these things. Um, and then when the officers get on scene, they start getting notes from U.S. Navy Secretary Gideon Welles saying, it'd be really nice if you occupied this head of passes. It'd be really nice if you put a fort at the head of passes. Hey, how come you haven't done this yet? Hey, a Confederate commerce raider escaped the Mississippi River. It'd be nice if. And the guy in charge of the naval squadron blockading the Gulf of Mexico gets fired because he doesn't take action fast enough. This guy, William Mervine, gets fired and replaced by another naval officer, William McKean. And his very first note to Gideon Welles in Washington is, I have assumed charge of the naval squadron. I am going to put ships in the head of passes.
Okay.
Like
So
he gets the hint of
he
this
got he got the hint.
discretionary, not discretionary order. It's one of those is practicable orders that
Yeah.
sort of exist out there of it's not really practicable, it's an order, but So like there's a little bit of a miscommunication between the US Naval High Command in DC and the on-scene squadron commanders. There's a little bit of back and forth with that. And it costs careers.
So do you blame Margrave? Like when he gets fired, for dragging his feet, was he
Mhm.
justifiable in not going right in there and starting to dig?
What's weird is that he had ordered that initial survey of the area with the Army Corps of Engineers, but hadn't done anything since then, and that's kind of why he got
Okay.
fired. And he said I got fired because other people were dragging their feet, and I couldn't do anything about it. Which not the best thing you want to hear from the guy in charge of all the ships. When you could just say you do this.
Yeah.
So Gideon Welles writes in his diary a lot of like that guy was worthless. We had to get him out of the way. which some of that's probably some like CYA after the fact. So it's a little bit of a complicated issue. What's interesting to me though is that like that and then the whole battle itself leads to a lot of people being fired in the US Navy. And if they weren't fired, those would be some of the commanders attacking New Orleans in April of
Uh,
1862. And so it kind of clears the way. And if these guys had done better, Farragut wouldn't be in charge of the attack on New Orleans. One of these guys would be. And
uh,
then maybe that turns out like there's some of those little what if conundrums in there. Um, so like yeah, people, it's kind of like the U.S. Army, right? A bunch of generals get fired in the first year of the war, and then other people prove their worth and get promoted. And so this is kind of the Navy's version of that.
Okay, I literally just about to ask that because it seems like this is kind of like the figuring out your tool set and which tools work and which tools don't, and then kind of getting rid of the stuff that's not working out for you.
And it
Um,
was tough because a couple of the ship captains at the head of passes for the U.S. Navy, they're there because they haven't been to sea in so long, like 10 or 15 years. They've just been on
oh,
shore assignments. So they haven't commanded a ship in 10 years. And they're about to get kicked out of the Navy as the war starts because of just inaction. And then they get promotions in command of a ship. And they're like, well, okay, so you're going, because the Navy is desperate for ships. And so they're desperate for experienced officers to command those ships. And so some of those guys don't do so well, which their antebellum service would hint at that. So there's even more weird
yeah.
factors in that.
And then let's add one more complication to this too. If you had a bunch of guys who'd been out to sea once upon a time, and then they're put in charge of a ship that is basically navigating in fresh water or part of fresh water. Like the Mississippi poses some unique navigational challenges to a Navy officer. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. First thing, we think of the Mississippi River as being really big, and that's true, but it's also not that big. It's narrow. It's a river, right? That's got a current. That current constantly flows in one direction, downriver, obviously. So you have to go up the river. You have to stem that current. All these separate passes lead to those geographic challenges we talked about earlier. And then you've got just the complications of it's the Gulf of Mexico. It's the summer of 1861. There's a whole lot of weather happening. Like people are experiencing what might be hurricanes or coastal storms all the time. Mosquitoes are everywhere constantly. The crews are getting sick from the weather and from the exposure. It's not the best place to just be anchored at and hanging out for 6 months, to an extent. And so there are some real complicating factors to that. The other good complicating factor is an advantage for the Confederates. If whoever controls that head of passes, that palm area, if the Confederates control that, that means that their blockade runners that are leaving New Orleans can literally sit in that spot and then send little rowboats down each pass and just send an alert when the pass is clear because a blockader moves. So and they've got telegraph stations set up in the head of passes for that to help communicate instantly with like the lighthouse keepers and everything like that.
Oh,
Um, and so that's why the U.S. really wants to seize control. Eight blockaders fanned out and out of mutual support or control the head of passes, and now you control the whole river, or at least the
mhm.
whole mouth of the river completely, and all the ships are in one spot. They can help each other out. So, you know,
Uh,
it's it's a huge fight over the complexity of geography, I guess.
is that area affected by the tides a lot? How dramatic are the
Um,
tides in the Gulf?
so tides exist in the Gulf, and some parts of it, yes. So at the mouths of all these passes, so the entrance channels, the channel bars is what everybody calls them, the spot where it actually meets the Gulf and the river ends, the Gulf meets. Sediment builds up there. There's a channel bar. That's where ships have to go across the bar to get into or out of a port. Um, and some of that sediment is there because tides are moving in and out from the coastline, and then currents from the river are pushing the opposite direction. And so that creates a whole lot of essentially what they call literally even today they call mud lumps, which is just little chunks of islands just appearing in random spots, and they're not above the water usually. And You got to be an expert coastal pilot or river pilot to even know where these things are or how they're moving, and they could disappear 2 weeks later, and it's just a hot mess for like navigation.
And I also kind of think again along the lines of these unique obstructions to or challenges to the river. I remember when I was researching Farragut's first move up to Vicksburg, and he's talking about like tree stumps and stuff, just flotsam being thrown at his ships because he's going against the current. At a couple knots. I can't remember what the current was. 4 or 5 maybe. Um,
Yeah.
but like, imagine having a tree trunk just thrown at your boat and you
Mhm.
you don't have a whole lot of maneuverability to suddenly get out of the way. And so his ships were just getting beaten up as he's trying to go against the current. And there at the mouth of the river, you still have those sorts of things coming at you too.
I mean, that flotsam exists. In 62, the Confederates built like a chain barrier of sunken ships and rafts to block Fort Jackson and St. Philip to block the river. And the first attempt at that fails because so much flotsam had hit the barrier from the coming from upriver that the whole thing disintegrated and they had to
Uh,
replace it with another thing at the last minute. So like that's normal stuff. And even today, if you're on the Mississippi River in the New Orleans area, you can just see quick junk essentially just floating downriver all the time. I mean, that's where all the convergence of rivers from like 20 something states converge. Water in Pittsburgh ends up in New Orleans. Water in Yellowstone National Park ends up in New Orleans. So there's a whole lot of
water from
flotsam.
behind St. Bonaventure University ends up in New Orleans, actually.
Like it's everywhere, which I think that's really cool. That's a testament to the power of the Mississippi River Valley and how
Yeah.
big it is. But like that means that if a tree falls in the river, it's going to end up in New Orleans or somewhere nearby or as somewhere along the way down,
If a tree falls in the river and no one is there to hear it, does it make a splash?
probably.
Yeah, I'm just getting to.
I would assume.
So, new guy takes over. First thing he does is I'm going to put some ships at the head of passes.
Yeah, and he
So,
does.
how does that pan out for him?
It's a disaster. Um, he's going to send 4 ships. He wants to send a bunch of ships into the head of passes. 4 end up making it, essentially. The guy he sends to be in charge of this flotilla there, his name's John Pope, and not that John Pope, is another John Pope, because of course. Um, And that guy is having a bad time of it. He's got some medical issues that cause him to um, stay awake at night. And when he's under stress, he doesn't eat and other things like that. Like fever comes and hits him every now and then. It's from an old illness from when he was at sea, like in China, the previous decade, sort of a thing. So he's going to be constantly having these medical issues as the going gets tough. They mysteriously reappear. It's kind of like an AP Hill thing.
Jim?
Um, he's going to bring up one ship. It's called USS Richmond, which is the biggest of all the ships that are going to be going up the river. Several other ships go up the river as well. There's USS Vincennes, and then there's USS Preble, and there's USS Waterway. Now, here's the dumb part. Richmond's the only real warship out of those that is really good for river fighting. It's a steam sloop, so it's got a
Right.
steam engine, right? Vincennes and Preble are sailboats
Ooh, okay.
going up a river. It takes them 2 weeks to get up the river to the head of passes. The Water Witch isn't a gun. It's in a warship. It's a little gunboat. It's a paddle wheel ship, and it's really just essentially a tug for the sailing ships to
Okay.
maneuver them and tow them. The Confederates sink some ships at the mouth of the river, at the mouth of Southwest Pass, the pass that everybody uses, the one that's dredged the most. Um, and as they're going into the head of passes, they're smashing into these sunken ships, and that delays things. They're running aground on the channel bar, and that delays things. It takes them a couple of weeks to really get there, and that's just meanwhile Confederate ships, and I'll put ships in air quotes, Confederate gunboats that are like mounting 1.5 cannons are watching them the whole time.
How do you get a
Uh,
half a cannon?
it, it you know it's these ships, they're not real warships. The Confederates
Yeah.
have no real warships on the Mississippi River. Um, most of their ships mount 2 cannons,
Okay.
literally, uh, and that's it. So it's kind of a little game of cat and mouse going back and forth.
Now, can you explain the strategy of sinking ships in the channel to prevent passage? Because it seems like if the Confederates also still want to be able to use the river, that would be a problem for them.
Yeah, so it's kind of like what they did at Mobile Bay with torpedoes. You create them in a certain, you sink them in a certain spot, and then you leave a narrow gap open. And as long as the pilots on your side know where that gap is, they can go right through it with no problem. Um, but the enemy will not know exactly where that gap is, and so they're statistically likely to run into one of them at some point.
Okay.
The U.S. Navy does the same thing off of Charleston. They sink a bunch of old ships. They call it the Stone Fleet in 1861 to try to keep blockaders from going in and out. That doesn't work very well. Um, and this one only works decently. It would have worked better if the Confederates had launched a naval attack as they were hitting these ships and running aground, because that was kind of the point, you know. But the Confederates didn't do anything like that and gave the U.S. Navy time to keep moving up the river, keep moving up the river. And in early October, they secure that head of passes for the U.S. government. They seize it and they're anchored in it.
So when they finally do secure the head of passes behind schedule, took them a while to do it. Um, how are they feeling about their situation? Like, oh my gosh, this is taking us 2 weeks to get up here.
They don't really care about the timeline. It's October by the time they do it, so like a campaigning season is over with. They're essentially just biding their time for the rest of the year at that point.
Okay.
They're just happy to be doing it and to have those ships in mutual support. But then the U.S. Navy starts sending more ships and more ships and more ships. Those for the four that are in the head of passes, but a whole bunch of other ships are just like floating around nearby. Supply ships that are anchored outside in the Gulf of Mexico, just hanging out, that are full of coal and repair parts and stuff like that. They capture a pilot boat from the Mississippi River Pilots Association in the head of passes, and that's going to be a little tender that moves between boat and boat to transport communications. Um, and then they bring up a blockade runner that they captured off the coastline of Louisiana. There's this blockade runner named Toon, which they had captured as it tried to sneak into coastal Louisiana. When they captured, by the way, it had like 5,000 rifles on it. So
Oh,
that's not rifles that the Confederacy gets to use. They bring Toon up the head of passes and use it as a tender to bring coal from those supply ships outside to the warships inside the head of passes. And so it's basically just a little coaling ship all of a sudden. There's a whole bunch of random ships moving around. And they've also contracted for an army ship. So it's not an army warship, it's a civilian ship the army contracted for. Its name is McClellan, mysteriously. And it's supposed to be bringing heavy artillery, the cannons for the fort they're supposed to build in the head of passes that they canceled, but the guns are on their way already, so too late for that.
yeah. And this is a time where the Army and Navy are still trying to figure some things out as far as how to work together and who's responsible for what. Does that cause any problems for this campaign?
Not really. The cannons that I just mentioned, they're coming from Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas, one of the big forts that the U.S. didn't lose control of in Southern Territory and rebel territory. So, and they're just kind of sitting in the fort doing nothing. And so they're like, yeah, we'll loan you some heavy artillery. That's fine. No big deal. It's just kind of an interesting, good early point of U.S. Army and Navy cooperation, probably because the Navy didn't say, hey, we need 10,000 troops. They just said, can we have some cannons in the fort that nobody's using the cannons in? And can
Yeah.
you give us a boat?
Yeah.
And like two engineers.
So
So
that's an
like
easy ask.
it's a pretty easy ask. They don't have to go to DC for that ask. It's local people just saying, let's just make it happen.
Yeah.
But it is an early case of cooperation where in other parts of the country at the same time, they're not cooperating very well.
Yeah. So as this armada begins to collect around the initial four boats, and so now there's some infrastructure floating into place, what message do the Confederates take as they're watching all of that happen?
Yeah, the Confederates are freaking out because New Orleans is suffering in a big way. Uh, Blockade running stops in New Orleans when this happens, and even before it, there's no trade. If you read the diaries of people in the city of New Orleans, they're saying things like, "Oh, remember that time we had fish for lunch? I wish."
Yeah.
Or like, "Hey, the price of shoes has skyrocketed all of a sudden. I don't know why." Like the blockade is showing its impact on the city at the same time that regiment after regiment after regiment are being sent to Tennessee or Kentucky or Virginia. So like there's an outward push of military forces to other theaters at the same time that the civilian population is suffering. And so people in New Orleans are kind of freaking out a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, and the guy in charge of the naval forces in New Orleans, George Holland, says, basically like something must be done. And he comes to take action, and his action is he's going to gather all these random gunboats that he's got and combine them into a flotilla and launch a surprise attack to drive the U.S. Navy out of the head of passes, and maybe that'll stir some things up and create a big victory.
Hmm. And how easy is it for him to pull that armada together or
Yeah,
flotilla? I suppose I
it,
should
it,
use more accurate terms because I'm a landlubber. I don't know all
I
the.
mean, Armada's fine too, but
Okay.
I what Armada means big fleet, but
Yeah.
like, um, let's see. The Confederate fleet is CSS McRae, one of my favorite ships to study for some reason. It's 8 cannons, a steamboat. There's CSS Tuscarora, which has 30 sailors and 2 cannons on it. So it's just a river tug.
Yeah.
There's Ivy, which used to be a privateer, but it can't
Oh yeah.
privateer anymore, and so now it's part of the Navy all of a sudden. It's got 2 cannons on it. There's
Doesn't the Ivy
Jackson.
doesn't the
No,
Ivy later get captured off the Outer Banks? Am I remembering that right? No,
no.
I'm thinking something else.
This Ivy gets destroyed on the Mississippi River. There might be another Ivy though. There's a lot
Okay.
of ships with the same name. There's a ship called Jackson.
Okay.
Nice, 2 cannons. You see a 2 cannon theme going here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then there's this privateer called Calhoun, which isn't part of the fleet, but the Confederate Navy rents it from their owners.
Oh, okay.
It's a rented ship
Okay.
for, you know, a couple of cannons. That's the flagship, by the way. This
Oh,
privateer,
okay.
yeah. And then there's this tug named Watson, which has no cannons, and its job is to tow fire rafts, just barges. So
Ah,
like,
okay.
going up and down the river, every year going down the river, coming from St. Louis or whatever, they just float barges down. Like that's what Lincoln did when he was doing the Mississippi River stuff, just floating down rafts.
Right.
They just bought 3 of these things, filled them with like pitch, tar, turpentine, and wood. They're gonna set these things on fire and just set them loose in the U.S. flotilla to cause a muck.
Oh.
Um, and then there's one more ship because we haven't talked about the Ironclad yet.
That's right.
Uh,
I'm waiting. I'm waiting
you're like,
because this is like
you're like,
pre-ironclad, right?
right? We haven't even gotten to the Ironclad. There's an Ironclad named Manassas. Um,
Ah.
it's a privateer. It's not part of the Confederate Navy. Now, the dumb part is, why would a privateer be an ironclad, right? Like, how is it going to go out and sink a ship or capture a ship as an iron? Like, what's the point? When the Confederates issued letters of marque and reprisal for privateering, there's a little like asterisk with a footnote that says, "Oh yeah, by the way, and if you sink an enemy warship as a privateer, we're going to give you the value of the money of the warship."
Mm.
So that's what this Manassas ironclad is trying to do. The guy who built it, John Stevenson, he actually went to Montgomery, Alabama, pre-Richmond, early in the war in April of 61 and pitched this idea, and the Confederate Navy basically ignored him. And he's like, I'll just do it myself. He wanted to
Yeah.
build this, he wanted to take river tugboats, cover them in iron plating, and send them all out at the same time. And so this is the test ship to prove that this could be done.
Okay.
Um, Basically it's designed to be a ram. So this is the origin of like Civil War ram attacks, and it's the very first ironclad that functions in North America. And
Okay.
by ironclad, I mean like it's got 1 inch of iron plating,
Okay.
whereas like CSS Virginia is 4 inches, Monitor has 8 inches, 1 inch. So
One
it's not
inch.
very well protected. Um, that ironclad, which has a letter of marque and reprisal from the Confederate government, it is a privateer. Holland basically just takes the ship.
Oh.
He goes. There's a lot of controversy. Some people say he just went to the ship Stevenson, the guy in charge of the ship, and just said, "Hey, it's my ship now. It belongs to me." And there's some evidence for that because Stevenson says, "I will never work with the Confederate Navy again," and the Confederates pay $100,000 for this ship. 6 months later.
Yeah.
There's also some evidence that Hollins went to him and said, "Hey, could we borrow it? And you can stay on it." And then right before the battle, Stevenson was told, "Well, you get off, but like we'll keep the ship for now."
Yeah.
And then there's some evidence that maybe Stevenson offered the ship and then he got kicked off of it because they were like, well, we can't have a civilian in charge of a ship in battle. Like, no, no, get off.
Right.
But the ship ends up in the Confederate force, and it will be a Confederate warship after this battle. But like, I guess during the battle, it's technically just seized privateer ironclad. Like it's really stupid terminology, I suppose.
Yeah. So as
Nitpicky.
you had to sort through those accounts to kind of make the clearest account that you could from that, who's writing these stories and how long after were the fact are they written? And, like, how are you weighing these competing accounts of what happened?
It's a disaster of accounts. Everybody is contradicting everybody. Um, Collins, the guy in charge of the Confederate Navy, writes a memoir published 50 years after he is dead
When did he write it?
in the 20th century.
Oh, okay. So even then it was old then. Yeah, okay.
The guy who wrote the most about the battle is James Morgan. He's 16 during the battle, and he writes all of his accounts during World War One.
Wow. Okay.
You know, a couple of Confederate naval officers write accounts in the 1880s. There's a couple of battlefield reports from a couple of officers and from the battle itself right afterwards. For the
Right.
U.S. Navy, there's like one guy writes letters home, one officer, but they've never been published. They're just in the Naval Academy's archive. Um,
Uh,
there's a Confederate engineer who wrote letters during the battle, but they're unpublished and they're in an archive in Alabama. Like there's very little published firsthand stuff written, and virtually none besides what's in the ORNs
yeah.
from the wartime itself.
Because I
So
was thinking,
all these accounts are like they have to be deconstructed, and literally I had to take everything written by anyone and interrogate it sentence by sentence.
yeah. Okay. Because I was thinking specifically about the Hollis and Stevenson. Well, no, I did this. No, I did, who got kicked off and, and like it becomes a case of he said, and, when they said it and to whom they said it makes a difference to all that. And, I mean, to me, that just seems like a very tangled kind of a bit of territory to step into.
It's a hot mess, and some of the newspaper accounts from the time help, but those contradict each other too. I mean, everything's contradicting everybody, and so there's a whole lot of guesswork and educated guesswork. And in the book, there's a whole lot of me explaining what everybody says and then deconstructing it and then saying this is probably what most likely occurred. But
Yeah.
the end result is the Confederates have the ship as they go downriver,
Right.
or as they launch their attack.
What gives Stevenson the idea to try to plate a tugboat with iron?
Yeah, he I think this came from so during the Crimean War, a couple of ships rammed each other in Europe, and that made it into some newspapers. And then Scientific American, right before the war, the magazine, they printed a concept for an underwater floating mortar ship where the
Yeah.
mortar would be placed on the side and then it would go to an enemy hull and shoot the mortar out. And I
Oh,
think that he just merged both ideas into one, combined it and made it look like the cigar steamers that Ross Winans was making at the time. If you're familiar, and you're probably not, but like if people listening are familiar with the cigar boats being made in the 1850s.
yeah. Okay.
Um, and merge all that and what you've got. And it's also a practical thing of like, okay, we've got tugs. We can coat the top with iron. We've got a lot of tugs. We don't have a lot of cannons. Steam tugs are strong vessels. They have to be because they have to pull ships, they have to push ships. So they're used to smashing into things. A plus B equals ram attack,
Okay.
you know, and
Okay.
it's the best they got. Or at least he's saying that's the best they got.
Uh, so basically, then this is a beta test for the idea of iron plating. Like before the Federals show up, did he have some other plan for developing his idea, or is this sort of like, oh, suddenly a field test, let's go?
No, 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 no. His plan. He had the plan as the war began. He was developing the ship in the summer before Head of Passes was even occupied. Um, and he was going to do the privateering thing to try to attack one of these ships, specifically USS Brooklyn, one of the blockaders of the Mississippi River, as the proof of concept, and then like take all that money from capturing a warship or sinking it, and then, build three more of them maybe. Then you've got a
Ah,
fleet of four, and then they can launch a really big surprise attack one night and repeat it, and then maybe clear the coastline. Who knows?
yeah. So before we get it back into the narrative of the action, let me explore this idea a little bit more. So the battle happens. Does the Confederacy take some of what he has done with this and apply that to the construction of the CSS Virginia? I mean, because that's not an
It,
idea that comes out of nowhere.
no, no, both sides see this and use it. There are some significant, and that's one of the reasons I thought like writing a whole book about this one battle. Like, why does it even matter? Because New Orleans gets captured 6 months later anyway, so who cares? It matters because of those attacks. Um, the Confederate River Defense Fleet is them trying to make Manassas, but do it 10, 14 ships at a time, just without the iron plating.
Yeah.
The U.S. Ram Fleet at Memphis is the U.S. counter to the Confederate River Defense Fleet. Um, there's no evidence that Ironclad Virginia, there's no evidence that Manassas's ramming attack in October of 61 at the head of passes made the Confederates in Virginia go, oh, we better add a ram to this. Um, but it proved that ramming attacks can work. And
Hmm.
so instead of them saying, oh, the ram's an extra thing, maybe then all of a sudden it changed their mind to, oh, no, the ram's one of the primary weapons for this ironclad in Virginia. And then it rams a ship, USS Cumberland, at Hampton Roads, and sinks it. And then mysteriously, all Confederate ironclads have rams all of a sudden until they all get replaced with like spar torpedoes, explosive gunpowder kegs at the bow instead later in the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's some significant, like, everybody's building rams, and this is the proof of concept, like you said, of ironclads. So, like, it's the first test case of they like there were accounts during the battle of like you could hear the bullets bouncing off, you could hear cannonballs bouncing off, kind of a thing. And so
Hmm.
when those accounts hit newspapers, everybody's like, we better build some more ironclads real quick. Like let's go into high gear with
Yeah.
that. And we start seeing programs in Charleston and whatnot getting developed for the Confederates. So like it's got some serious ramifications for how people are thinking about the naval war.
I see what you just did there.
I know, right? Right? If we're gonna make fun of each other, let's do it.
And like, yeah, and you've spent a lot of time writing about the River War in particular. So, like, is the development of the River Ironclad, like, what track is that on compared to the development of a seafaring ironclad?
Yeah, so the very first ironclads ever built were seafaring ironclads. The British Warrior and the French Gloire, those were steam frigates. So that's like your big, like USS Merrimack size ship. Um, those were the very first ones ever built. Um, when the US is building ironclads in 61, they're building the river ships, the Pook turtles and whatnot on the river. But then they're building three competing designs on the coastline. One becomes Monitor. One becomes USS Galena, which didn't do so well, and one becomes USS New Ironsides, which is one of those big steam frigates. So they're building both at the same time. And
Okay.
so it's all being done simultaneously, essentially.
Okay. So just that, a lot of innovation happening. Let's see how it all shakes out. And okay.
Yeah.
So Hollis assembles his flotilla. He commandeers the ironclad and he's going downriver.
Yeah.
Um, what's he expecting and what is his plan and how does it unfold?
Yeah. So first off, he knows who's in the head of passes. He knows what ships are there. He knows their capabilities. The guy in charge of Manassas, the naval officer, this guy named Worley, 8 months before was an officer on USS Richmond, the biggest ship in the head of
Oh,
like they know what they're looking at. They know exactly what they're targeting. It's the same officers on the same ships, essentially. Like don't forget these guys are all antebellum officers on the same vessels. Like they literally know each other. I think one of the U.S. naval officers, when he writes home, he's like, "Can't you believe that it was Worley on the ship that attacked us? Like, what is this? Like I know that guy." Um, so they've got a plan. The Confederates have knowledge. They've been scouting the head of passes, and they have a plan. So
mhm.
phase one of their plan is Manassas is gonna sneak in the middle of the night after the moon has set alone, target Richmond, the biggest ship, and ram it.
Yeah.
And then they're going to shoot a rocket into the air in the night. And when the Confederates see the rocket, they're going to light the three fire rafts that they've towed down. They're going to release them and just send them down the river. And they're all chained together. And the hope is that the rafts will hit a ship and the ship in the middle, and it will wrap around the ship in the middle and then burn it from both sides.
Hmm.
Or at the worst, just cause pandemonium. And then as the U.S. flotilla is retreating in haste, the Confederate gunboats move in for the kill and just start shooting with all their artillery cannons. And so they have a real plan here. And mysteriously, that's exactly how the plan turns out in
Okay.
actuality. It's like the one time in a Civil War battle where the plan goes directly the way that they wanted.
Yeah.
Um, so they know who they're facing. They know what they're facing. They know they're outgunned. I mean, the U.S. Navy has a whole lot more cannons of better quality, um, fewer ships, but like the Confederate ships aren't real gunboats, so
Mhm.
whatever.
Right.
Um, but they also know that the U.S. has sailing ships in there, and if they can cause a panic, maybe those sailing ships get stuck in the mud. Maybe they
Mm.
can get captured, something like that. Like the panic of a retreat, hopefully, can cause some serious problems, and that's kind of what happens too.
So, and it seems to me that the home turf advantage. I guess turf is a generous term for mud
Mhm.
bars, but I mean that's really helpful to the Confederates in this instance, then, because they not only know the area but how to operate, navigate in the area.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's true though. I mean, like some of these guys for the Confederate squadron, some of them aren't pre-war naval officers. It's like river pilots or civilians that joined the Navy, but they've been fishing on the river for 10 years. Like
yeah.
different aspects like that of that local knowledge really brings to fruition to help.
Yeah. Now, you'd mentioned that the Federals had already decided they were going to give up the plan to build a fort, so they're kind of pulling out, um, or giving up on that particular idea. But are they actually leaving head of passes?
No, they're
No.
not. The plan
Okay.
is to stay there permanently with the ships,
Okay.
um, and keep the blockade bottled up, keep the river bottled up, and then who knows? Maybe in 1862 they'll just advance up the river.
Yeah.
That'll be phase one. Because don't forget when Farragut goes up the river, it takes him a whole month to get his
Right.
ships into the head of passes to begin the assault on Forts Jackson and St. Philip. So the Confederates bought themselves that month of time to prepare for defending New Orleans.
Hmm.
Um, and the U.S. is hoping that they don't have to spend that time later on to
Right.
advance up the river,
Right.
or at least they'll be able to do it more securely. So there's some of that.
So, how effective is the Federal response when Hollis attacks and launches his plan?
Yeah. So the Federals have an actual plan to in respond. Their plan is if the enemy attacks in the night, it's not just like everybody run away like a Monty Python
Run
video.
away! Run away!
Exactly.
Yeah.
The plan is USS Richmond is going to get underway, weigh anchor, and steam into the middle of the head of passes and shoot upriver. The sailing boats are going to sail down the southwest pass of the river and escape, and that little paddle wheel or water witch is going to help maneuver them.
Okay.
And then as those ships escape, Richmond will retreat after everybody and cover the withdrawal. So they know that if there's a big surprise attack, their plan is retreat. Their plan is to not fight in the darkness and then lose. Their plan is withdraw to the Gulf of Mexico and secure themselves there and then just recapture the head of passes later on after the Confederates, get a weakness later.
Yeah.
And that's actually what the US Navy does. You know, um, Manassas rams USS Richmond at about 4 a.m. on October 12th, 1861.
Hmm.
It launches its rocket into the air. The US forces are literally shooting blindly into the water, like they don't know what's going on. When the rocket gets launched into the air, Hollins releases the fire rafts. And then when they see the fire rafts coming down the river, John Pope, the Navy guy, orders the U.S. flotilla to withdraw and retreat. And they start doing exactly that. Richmond goes into the middle of the head of passes, covers the withdrawal, and the two sailing vessels retreat down the Southwest Pass. And then it gets bad.
Because that wasn't bad enough. I just had to retreat. Okay.
The first ship retreating, USS Preble, runs aground very briefly and then skirts over the channel bar into the Gulf of Mexico. The second ship going, USS Vincennes, runs aground. and it runs aground hard on the channel bar with its stern pointed upriver. So it's going that way, and its stern pointing that way. So it can't shoot up the river anymore, and it's stuck.
Uh,
And then Richmond is following it, and it runs aground. But when it runs aground, it hits and then angles, and now it's run aground with its broadside facing upriver.
oh,
So two of the four federal ships are now aground at the mouth of the Southwest Pass, can't move, and the Confederates are advancing towards them. And they don't know what to do. Like it's kind of pandemonium hitting. Um, and then some chaos starts happening. Pope orders the ships outside, all those supply ships, to leave, to scatter, because well, one of those supply ships has all the coal for everybody. And if the
okay.
Confederates capture that, that's a whole lot of fuel. One of
Yeah.
them has 9,000 guns captured from blockade runners, including the ones captured from that Toon ship I mentioned earlier. If the Confederates capture that, that's an entire division's worth of weapons for the infantry, fighting in Virginia later on or something. So, like, he orders these ships to scatter, and they do, all except for one. One of the supply ships outside, its name is Nightingale. It's actually a former slave ship that the U.S. Navy captured in 1861. It's aground outside in the Gulf of Mexico, stuck. Um, and so now you've got three U.S. warships stuck and can't move. When Pope orders those ships to retreat outside, he does it by putting up signal flags, like the little colored flags that you put them in a certain order, they send a code. The code was ships outside, go away. The guy in charge of USS Vincennes, his name's Robert Handy. He's one of those officers who hasn't been to sea in 15 years. He interprets that signal meant to go to the other ships outside. He interprets that signal as a signal for him, and he reads the signal as abandon your ship and destroy it because it's stuck. And so as the Confederates are attacking, Vincennes, the crew loads into boats. They set a fuse to the magazine and they sail and they row away to the other ships. And it's kind of comical. Handy, the guy in charge of Vincennes, when he abandons the ship, he goes to USS Richmond, the flagship that Pope's on, and he's got the American flag tied around his waist to save it. And he comes on the ship, and basically Pope is like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you not on your ship? And he's like, well, I'm here and following your orders. And he's like, I never ordered that. And like the two of them are gonna fight for the next week over. You told me to leave my ship. You told no, I didn't. I told other people. Like there's a huge fight over it.
Yeah.
Um, so now that's happening, and the guy in charge of all the ships outside, the supply ships, he orders that Nightingale ship that is stuck also to be abandoned and destroyed as well. So like it seems like the U.S. Navy is just like, oh, the enemy is attacking, destroy the ships and run away, sort of
Oh,
a
okay.
thing. Like
So we
there's a
do
little
get the Monty Python thing after all.
right,
Yeah.
and by the way, the officer who ordered the Nightingale ship destroyed, there's a whole lot of rumor that like he was basically drunk for the entire week before the battle
Oh,
and during the battle. So it's like it gets even dumber with the comedy show.
uh,
Um, so it seems like the Confederates are in a good spot, right? Two ships aground in the Southwest Pass, another one aground outside. Two of those three that are aground are being destroyed by their own guys, essentially, and abandoned, kind of. Just as all that's happening, the Confederates retreat.
oh,
Oh yeah, yeah. No, they just stop
yeah.
and they go back up the river and they claim victory.
Okay.
It's kind of weird, right? You're like, wait a minute, that's not what I was expecting
Yeah.
to hear.
Our work here is done. We'll see. Yeah.
We've done it. The
What's
task.
what's Hollins's rationale for that?
Yeah. So nobody's really been able to explain it.
Oh,
I've been able to figure it out. It's a combination of things. Number one, in his very poorly written memoir, written 50 years after he was dead, he says he was short of ammunition and gunpowder, which
yeah,
I believe.
yeah.
Um, they went down with so much gunpowder, they ran out, or they were getting low, and he didn't want to risk it. A second thing is the Confederates are misinterpreting what they're seeing. When Manassas rammed USS Richmond, the guy in charge of the ship, Worley, actually, when he gave his initial report, he said, I didn't, what he said was, I rammed the sailing sloop. So he thinks he rammed one of the sailing ships, not the steamship.
Okay.
And what ship is abandoning its ship in and being blown up. USS Vincennes, one of the sailing ships. He thinks that he rammed that ship, and as it's retreating, the ship is falling apart. So they ran it aground deliberately, and it is sinking right there. So they're like,
Um,
mission accomplished. We sunk one of the enemy
yeah.
ships,
And I
and
suppose that also means then like the Richmond is still out there lurking someplace,
oh, it's stuck.
you know?
It's stuck,
Well,
and
no,
it's
but I
it's
mean
stuck like
from
and
the
it's stuck
Confederate
like
perspective, you know.
yes, yeah, and it's stuck like 200 yards away.
Yeah.
And so the guys on Richmond are freaking out because, like, when that ship blows up, giant cannons are going to start raining on their ship.
Yeah.
So that a third thing for making me think that Holland's retreated was some of the Confederates saw the ships, the supply ships, getting underway, making their sails get big and everything. You know, they're casting loose their sails and they're starting to maneuver, and they thought, "Oh, enemy reinforcements, we got to stop."
Okay.
And then there's a fourth reason that I think they stopped, and this is the real reason. That army ship bringing cannons shows up all of a sudden, but it doesn't show up in Southwest Pass. So, like, to go back to the Delta,
Yep.
it doesn't show up here where they're attacking. It shows up in this one.
Ah.
And when it's going up the pass, Collins, who's here, can see the battle, and then he looks over here and sees a steamboat that he doesn't know what it is. And he goes, enemy flanking force.
Yeah.
And so all of his ships here, he orders to retreat here
Right.
to make sure they're not outflanked and trapped somewhere in confined waters. Combine all that, and what you have is he says, okay, we sunk a ship, and he reports they sunk a ship. The enemy's reinforcements are showing up, and we took our gains and made sure we didn't have any losses. So victory for us. And the goal was get them out of head of passes. Well, our ships are there now, so we win.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think he took an actual realistic, tangible, let's have a limited victory, not a complete victory, so that we don't risk losing anything. And the result is the battle's over all of a sudden.
Yeah, and if he's thinking he's running out of ammunition too, with
Mm-hmm.
reinforcements coming up, so yeah, that seems like a pretty reasonable conclusion to come to on his part. So do
But
they?
it's a huge testament of the fog of war, right?
Yeah.
And the geography of naval battles, right? This isn't, you know, one pass on one side and the other pass on the other side, 30, 40 miles apart. It's not like a land battle where, at Gettysburg, the lines are 2 miles
Yeah.
and you can see it. All he's seeing is smoke puffing 25 miles away. And he's like, I don't have any ships over there. It's a steamboat. It's got to be the enemy. Duh.
Right. Right.
So it's super weird with the geography and the fog of war combining to create like what are they visualizing and what are they thinking as they visualize it? Not like what do we know happened?
Yeah. So Hollins then camps out in the head of passes, and then obviously they know, well, gosh, the Federals are probably going to want this back. This is probably going to be the scene of additional action. How do the Confederates then kind of learn from this incident in a way that might help them or not in the months ahead?
They don't. They
That's
claim
why I say they
victory.
don't, because I
No,
know
no,
they
no,
lose
no.
New Orleans, right?
They claim victory. They go back up to New Orleans. Um, Collins is like feted. He's given parties and balls and speeches and grandizing and everything like that. Um, and the New Orleans kind of devotes more money to building more warships. The ironclad programs for Louisiana and Mississippi, the two ironclads they build in New Orleans at the time, those are just getting started. And so like ironclad fever is starting to hit in New Orleans. But no blockade runners leave after this battle, even though the blockade is kind of missing in half of those passes. They don't capitalize on it. Meanwhile, the
Wow.
U.S. Navy is desperately trying to figure out what happened. Um, First thing, Vincennes, that ship that ran aground and was abandoned, they lit a fuse on that ship, and the ship didn't blow up because the
Oh,
fuse. And there's confusion over was the fuse cut or did it just not go out? And what we think is that the fuse just didn't. It just went out on its own at the last minute. Um, But that ship doesn't get destroyed, and it takes them a couple of days, but they get it refloated out into the Gulf of Mexico. Richmond, it takes a couple of days, they get it refloated out into the Gulf of Mexico. That Nightingale ship, the supply ship, gets refloated after about a week. Um, but then the U.S. Navy calls for reinforcements. They literally, within a couple of days, ships that are blockading the Atchafalaya River in coastal Louisiana and ships blockading Mobile. and ships near Ship Island, Mississippi, and ships near Pensacola, Florida are all coming to the head of passes or to the outer passes, the Gulf of Mexico part. And I think it's a really good testament of the U.S. Navy's power, even this early in the war. It's an embarrassing defeat. David Dixon Porter called this the most embarrassing battle in the history of the U.S. Navy.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like, everybody knows that they lost. Everybody knows it's an embarrassment. But here's the thing, the blockade wasn't broken, it was just dented. No Confederate blockade runners really got out afterwards for New Orleans. So, like, okay, so what's the point? Doesn't matter. And they just kept the ships blockading the outer rim, and they called for reinforcements that were there within a couple of days, and in some cases, a couple of hours.
Wow.
It's a testament to the fact that the U.S. Navy is playing not the battle game, but the campaign game.
Mhm.
And they've proven that they can adjust when there are setbacks. You know, it's kind of like U.S. Grant going, "Oh, we lost today, attack tomorrow." You know, that sort of a thing. You
Yeah.
know, we'll just get them later, and we'll just keep fighting and keep the pressure on. And at some point, they're not going to be able to respond, the Confederates, and so they're playing that kind of longer game. The problem is for the U.S. officers, you know, they're not the ones playing it anymore. You know, Pope gets relieved. He actually gets relieved medically, not because of
Oh.
incompetence, because of all his medical conditions. Handy gets relieved. He gets fired. Um, the guy that ordered Nightingale to get abandoned, the drunk guy, he gets relieved. He gets fired. He actually ends up enlisting in the U.S. Army and gets killed. He dies from disease on the peninsula in later in '62.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's trying to like reclaim his honor for being accused as a drunkard, sort of a thing. But all these officers get fired left and right, left and right. Virtually zero of the ship commanders for the U.S. flotilla are in charge of ships in 1862.
Mhm.
They're all gone.
Yeah.
And they're all replaced with younger people or people named David Farragut.
Hmm. A quick question:
Mysteriously.
as the Navy shifts away from these other places along the blockade, are the Confederates able to take advantage of the absence of some of those ships,
You
or
know, they blow it.
oh,
They blow it. The Atchafalaya River is left unblockaded for a few days, and maybe like one ship gets through.
yeah,
Um, Ship Island, Mississippi gets occupied by the U.S. Army shortly thereafter, so the Navy not being there for a couple of days is not that big of a deal. And Mobile, Pensacola, they don't send all the ships there; they just send a
okay,
couple. And so that like there are still present, there's still a presence there. But
okay,
like this idea of the Confederates break the blockade, and then that causes a widespread, larger break as people try to contain it,
hmm,
failure completely. Like
okay,
they don't capitalize on it at all.
yeah,
So, you know, it makes for really good copy in the newspaper. You know, we broke the blockade, we sunk a ship, you know, and everybody like makes fun of Hollins because like the very first report says like we attacked the blockade doesn't exist anymore. I sunk one of their ships and like none of it's true. But from his point of view, it is true
yeah,
that day
yeah,
based off the knowledge that he has. So he gets a lot of heat later on, and especially in the northern press for like being a liar when it was him interpreting the results of the battle through the fog of war the best way he could.
right.
And I'm not saying that he did that very well. I mean, the guy was born in 1799, so like he's not the youngest character. No, literally. So, and he replaced a naval officer who was born in 1790. Like they sent a spry young guy to take over from the other guy. Like so, you know, it's 1861. You get who you get sometimes,
Yeah, right.
and so there's just a lot of weirdness with this battle, and
Yeah,
the misinterpretations kind of got me. It was like I just had to keep diving deeper to figure it out because nobody seems to know what's happening. And if you read the literature, like the secondary sources, every book, including my own like Defending the Arteries of Rebellion book, this battle is like 4 pages
hmm,
in a 500-page book over and over again, 4 pages, 4 pages, 4 pages. And so um, nobody talks about the real consequences. Nobody talks about Confederate victory, but U.S. victory at the same time,
hmm,
but through containment, and nobody talks about how this impacted later RAM development or ironclad development or its impact on New Orleans and why it was even fought in the first place. Everybody just says, oh, you know, they just decided to have a battle all of a sudden.
yeah, yeah. And does it? directly tee up the conquest of New Orleans, or is it just sort of like a prelude? But we really kind of get our act together, and that's a different campaign.
So it is a different campaign, but what I'll tell you is that David Farragut, when he goes to New Orleans, he learns the lessons from this really fast.
Okay.
Um, when his ships are going up the Mississippi River, they mysteriously have guard ships all of a sudden, even further up the river to keep notice. And they've got nets put out to watch for ramming attacks in the night. And, all these things are being done that weren't done before. So, in a way, thank goodness for the US Navy that this embarrassing battle happened because lessons were learned. And those lessons helped Farragut not have that same repeat. And I'll tell you, Hollins is almost doing the same thing in April 1862. Um, he's up in Memphis area when he gets word that Farragut's coming up the river, and he leaves Memphis and takes his ships downriver. And when he gets to New Orleans, he's relieved of command for leaving Memphis without orders. But when he's in New Orleans reporting to the mayor there, Monroe, and to Mansfield Lovell, he says, I have a game plan to attack the enemy ships. We're going to launch a surprise attack. They're basically going to repeat the head of passes attack against Farragut's ships. And when he gets fired, the mayor and Lovell, they're literally begging him, please stay, ignore the order to leave, ignore the firing order. We'll back you up. Launch your surprise attack. Do it.
Mm.
So, like, Farragut taking these precautions, if the other guys would have been a little bit more insistent, he would have needed those precautions
Yeah,
because
right.
there would have been another repeat battle all of a sudden. So there are some lessons learned here that Farragut takes directly into the New Orleans campaign, and Holland tries to copy it in the New Orleans campaign. It just doesn't work out because the dude's on Jefferson Davis's hate list, essentially,
Uh,
for a number of reasons. And that's a whole nother story.
Join the club, it's
Yeah,
yeah, right.
it's one of those things.
Yeah.
But like that reminds me a lot of Beauregard, right? You left your spot without orders, fire that man.
Yeah.
It happens to Beauregard in '62 as well.
Yeah. Right.
So like there's some ramifications politically for that too. So like it's just a weird story, a fun battle. Zero people get shot in this battle.
Ah, okay.
Zero people get shot. Ships get hit with cannons and they're abandoning ship and everybody's drunk and everybody's panicking. Nobody dies.
Yeah.
It's kind
Well,
of crazy. And it's just one of those weird, like, in naval battles, either everybody dies because whole ships are missing, or nobody gets hit somehow because they're shooting cannons 5 miles away from each other and just they're not scoring hits. And it's just a game of maneuver, essentially. And this is one of those cases of maneuver won out over the killing that's going to become like the Battle of Hampton Roads, where hundreds and hundreds of sailors die in one
right.
day.
Right. The book is called Ironclad Ambush, available from Savis Beatty. Anything else you want to mention before we sign off?
Buy the book.
There, buy the book.
Why
Absolutely.
not?
It's a great chance to learn something new that has really fascinating implications for the larger war and a time period of the war that we don't typically know a lot about. So I appreciate the fact that you're peering into there for us. So,
Yeah,
Neil Chateltain,
absolutely.
thank you very much for being with us. I'm Chris Mackowski for the Emerging Civil War podcast. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.